15 shocking secrets the firefighter Xavier Gourmelon revealed about Princess Diana's car crash. Few people know the chilling details surrounding Princess Diana's tragic car crash, but one man witnessed it all up close. Xavier Gourmelon, the firefighter who was among the first responders at the scene, has kept quiet for years, until now. What he reveals is nothing short of shocking. From his first-hand experience performing life-saving measures to the final words Princess Diana whispered before everything changed forever, Gourmelon's account leaves more questions than answers. Did something happen that night that's been kept from the public? Is there more to the story than we've been told? Get ready to hear the untold truth, straight from the man who was there when the world lost its princess. These 15 secrets will change everything you thought you knew about that fateful night. Number 1. Princess Diana was conscious after the crash. When Xavier Gourmelon arrived at the scene of the crash, he was stunned to find that Princess Diana was conscious and responsive. Contrary to the widely held belief that she was unresponsive from the moment of impact, she was actually aware of her surroundings and even able to speak. This shocking revelation changed the public perception of what occurred in the moments after the crash. The idea that she was still fighting for her life adds a whole new layer of heartbreak to the tragedy. For first responders like Gourmelon, it's common to assess the severity of an accident by the condition of the victims, and Princess Diana's state initially gave them a glimmer of hope. The fact that she was still alive, seemingly coherent, only made the eventual outcome even harder to bear. Imagine being one of the first people to lock eyes with a person the whole world adored, and realizing that she was desperately clinging to life, only for things to take a tragic turn later. Number 2. Her final words were a cry for help. In one of the most haunting details revealed by Gourmelon, Princess Diana's final words were a simple yet gut-wrenching cry for help. "Oh my God, what's happened?" she asked, clearly disoriented and trying to make sense of the chaos surrounding her. These words, according to Gourmelon, were spoken in the frantic moments as she came to grips with what had just occurred. It's a sobering thought to imagine one of the world's most iconic figures, loved by millions, experiencing such fear and confusion in her final moments. Her words reflect a human vulnerability that resonates deeply, reminding us that even someone as famous as Princess Diana was not immune to the terror of an unforeseen catastrophe. This brief, final plea for understanding is perhaps one of the most tragic elements of the entire story, especially knowing that despite her awareness and consciousness, there was nothing anyone could do to change the course of events. Number 3. She showed no visible signs of fatal injury. One of the most perplexing aspects of the scene, according to Gourmelon, was that Princess Diana didn't appear to have any fatal injuries. There were no glaring wounds, no excessive bleeding, and nothing to immediately suggest that her life was in grave danger. This gave both him and his team reason to believe that she might pull through, which makes her sudden passing all the more confounding. For someone in Gourmelon's position, trained to handle emergencies, appearances can be deceiving, and that night was a clear example. The lack of obvious external injuries made it seem like the crash wasn't as severe as it ultimately was. This observation has haunted many people involved in the tragedy, including Gourmelon, who later expressed deep sorrow over the fact that despite her seemingly stable condition, her initial injuries proved too severe. It's a painful reminder that sometimes the most critical injuries are the ones you can't see. Number 4. He didn't realize he was treating Princess Diana. Amid the chaos of the crash site, Gourmelon had no idea that the woman he was treating was Princess Diana. The chaos, the crumpled metal of the car, and the gathering crowds of paparazzi made it nearly impossible to recognize her. It wasn't until later that he understood the gravity of the situation. At that moment, she was just another victim in need of medical help, and Gourmelon treated her with the same urgency and care that he would have afforded anyone else. It's almost unimaginable to think that someone could be so close to royalty, to one of the most famous women in the world, and not realize it. But in the midst of that kind of emergency, priorities shift, and it's about saving lives, not celebrity. This fact only underscores the profound tragedy of the situation, that in her final moments, Princess Diana was just another person, vulnerable and in need of help, far removed from the public figure the world knew. Number 5. He administered CPR and thought she would survive. As Gourmelon worked to save Princess Diana's life, he performed CPR when she went into cardiac arrest. Miraculously, her heart started beating again, giving him and his team renewed hope that she would survive. This is perhaps one of the most heartbreaking details of the entire event. There was a moment when it seemed like she would make it. Gourmelon, an experienced first responder, genuinely believed that Princess Diana had a fighting chance after her heart restarted. For a brief time, the situation didn't seem as grim, and it looked as though the princess might overcome the crash. But tragically, despite their best efforts, the damage done to her body was too great. This moment of hope, followed by the crushing reality of her passing, is something that has stuck with Gourmelon to this day. Even years later, he struggles with the fact that they couldn't do more to save her. Number 6. The atmosphere at the crash site was chaotic. The crash scene was complete chaos. When Gourmelon arrived, he found not just an overturned car and injured passengers, but a horde of paparazzi crowding the area. Flashes from cameras were going off nonstop, and the sound of people shouting made it difficult for rescue efforts to proceed smoothly. The paparazzi, more focused on capturing the moment than assisting the injured, added to the confusion and stress of the situation. It's difficult to imagine what it must have been like for Gourmelon and his team to try to work under those conditions. Every second counts in an emergency, and distractions like that can be the difference between life and death. The fact that the media were already swarming the scene speaks volumes about the relentless scrutiny Princess Diana faced, even in death. For the firefighters, though, their mission was clear: save lives, despite the circus happening around them. Number 7. Her condition seemed stable at first. When Gourmelon initially assessed Princess Diana, her condition seemed stable. She was conscious, communicating, and showing no signs of significant external trauma, which led him to believe that she might have a good chance of survival. At that moment, it appeared that things were under control, and for a brief time, the situation seemed less dire than it actually was. This sense of stability, however, was short-lived, as Princess Diana's condition began to deteriorate rapidly once she arrived at the hospital. It's a cruel twist of fate that such an iconic figure who appeared to be out of immediate danger would succumb to her injuries just hours later. Gourmelon's initial assessment, while optimistic, underscores the unpredictability of trauma injuries. Sometimes, what you see on the surface doesn't tell the whole story. It's a bitter reminder that even in seemingly stable situations, things can take a turn for the worse in an instant. Number 8. He noticed no blood, leading to initial optimism. Another reason for Gourmelon's initial optimism was the lack of visible blood at the scene. In most high-impact crashes, severe injuries often result in significant blood loss. But in Princess Diana's case, there was surprisingly little. This observation contributed to the belief that her injuries might not be life-threatening. It's easy to see why Gourmelon and his team were hopeful. The lack of external trauma suggested that she could recover. However, as we now know, internal injuries are sometimes the most lethal. And in Princess Diana's case, the damage was far worse than anyone could have imagined. Gourmelon later reflected on this moment with deep sadness, realizing that the lack of visible blood was a false indicator of her true condition. The fact that Princess Diana's injuries weren't immediately apparent only adds to the sense of tragedy, as it gave rescuers hope that, ultimately, proved to be misplaced. Number 9. The scene was surrounded by paparazzi. One of the most disturbing aspects of the crash was the behavior of the paparazzi. Instead of assisting in the rescue efforts, they surrounded the scene, taking photographs of the wreckage and the injured passengers, including Princess Diana. Gourmelon was appalled by their actions, describing it as a feeding frenzy of flashing cameras and people trying to get the perfect shot. It's hard to fathom the kind of pressure Princess Diana was under throughout her life. And this moment was no different, except now she was fighting for her life. The intrusive presence of the paparazzi turned an already tragic situation into something even more grotesque. Their refusal to help, instead prioritizing their photographs, not only hindered the rescue efforts, but also showed a complete disregard for the humanity of the situation. To this day, the paparazzi's role in that night continues to be a point of controversy and anger. Number 10. Dodi Fayed was already dead upon arrival. When Gourmelon and his team arrived at the scene, it quickly became apparent that Dodi Fayed, Princess Diana's companion, had died instantly in the crash. His body was unresponsive and there was nothing they could do to revive him. For the firefighters, this only heightened the urgency to save the remaining victims, particularly Princess Diana. Dodi's death added to the surreal and tragic nature of the crash. It was as if the night had already claimed its first life, and they were now in a race against time to prevent another. The loss of Dodi Fayed, while not as publicly mourned as Princess Diana's, was no less devastating for those involved in the rescue. His death underscored the severity of the crash, and for Gourmelon and his team, it was a stark reminder that they were dealing with a life-or-death situation. All they could do was focus on Princess Diana and hope for a better outcome. Number 11. The firefighters were completely focused on saving her. In the chaos of the crash site, Gourmelon and his team had only one priority: saving the lives of the injured. They weren't concerned with the media frenzy happening around them, or the fact that the world's most famous woman was involved. They were focused on providing medical care. For them, it didn't matter who she was, only that she was a human being in need of urgent help. Gourmelon recalls the intensity of those moments where every decision mattered and every second counted. They did everything in their power to stabilize Princess Diana, working as quickly and efficiently as possible under the circumstances. This professionalism and dedication is something that often gets lost in the media narratives surrounding the crash. The firefighters were there to do a job, and they did it to the best of their ability, even as the world was fixated on the tragic loss of Princess Diana. Number 12. He still feels haunted by her death. Years later, Gourmelon still carries the emotional weight of that night. He's expressed that the memory of treating Princess Diana and the eventual realization that she didn't survive continues to haunt him. For someone who was so intimately involved in her final moments, it's understandable that this experience would leave a lasting impact. First responders often deal with traumatic situations, but this one was different, not only because of the high-profile nature of the victim, but also because of the circumstances surrounding her death. Gourmelon's belief that Princess Diana would survive, only to later learn of her passing, left him with a sense of helplessness that still lingers today. It's a heavy burden to bear, knowing that despite their best efforts, they couldn't save her. For Gourmelon, the tragedy of that night is something that has stayed with him, a constant reminder of the fragility of life. Number 13. He couldn't believe the news of her death. When Gourmelon later heard the news that Princess Diana had died in the hospital, he was in disbelief. After all, he had seen her conscious and seemingly stable at the scene, and he'd managed to restart her heart. To him, it didn't seem possible that she could have succumbed to her injuries after showing such promising signs of recovery. The news was a devastating blow, not just to him, but to everyone involved in the rescue efforts that night. Gourmelon had said it took a long time for the reality of the situation to sink in. The fact that someone as iconic and beloved as Princess Diana could be lost so suddenly and tragically was hard to comprehend. This sense of disbelief is something that many people around the world shared in the days and weeks following her death. For those who were on the scene, like Gourmelon, it was a harsh and painful reminder of how quickly life can change. Number 14. The crash didn't seem fatal at first. One of the most puzzling aspects of the crash, according to Gourmelon, was that it didn't immediately seem fatal. The damage to the car, while significant, didn't initially suggest a high likelihood of death. In fact, Gourmelon noted that he had responded to accidents that looked far worse, but resulted in fewer fatalities. This is one of the reasons why Princess Diana's death was so shocking, both to those at the scene and to the world at large. The initial assessment of the crash gave hope that the victims would survive, which made the final outcome all the more devastating. It's a cruel irony that such a seemingly survivable crash ended in the loss of such an important figure. For Gourmelon, this only added to the sense of disbelief and frustration. What had seemed like a routine accident turned out to be one of the most tragic events in modern history. Number 15. The scene felt eerily calm after the initial chaos. After the initial chaos of the crash, there was an eerie calm that settled over the scene once Princess Diana was taken to the hospital. Gourmelon described it as a surreal moment, where the gravity of what had just happened hadn't fully set in yet. The flashing cameras, the screaming crowds, and the frantic efforts to save lives had all come to a halt, leaving a strange quiet in their wake. It was as if the world had paused for a moment, still reeling from the shock of what had occurred. For Gourmelon and his team, it was a moment of reflection, a brief pause before the full weight of the tragedy came crashing down. This calm, however, was fleeting. As the news of Princess Diana's death spread, the scene would once again be engulfed in chaos, this time with the full realization that the world has just lost its princess. It's clear that the tragic car crash that took Princess Diana's life left behind more questions than answers. Xavier Gourmelon's first-hand revelations add a new layer of intrigue to that fateful night, and it's hard not to wonder if we'll ever truly understand the full story. But now, we want to hear from you. What do you think about these shocking secrets shared by the firefighter who tried to save Diana's life? Do you believe there's more to the story? Or is this the missing piece we've been searching for? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this video as fascinating as we did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with others, and hit that subscribe button so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye!